one of the first things that came to our mind was God wanted us to serve people with dignity and respect, and we knew almost immediately that we were supposed to feed people the way we would feed our families. Early on, Lisa and I were so overwhelmed by how we were seeing God work that we started this document called the Timeline of Blessings.
Yes, the shelf paper. Is that what kind of the idea is right now?
Right now.
Like this, right here.
We felt challenged to just write down what God was doing. And we're a little behind. We're a couple of months behind on our document, but it's 20 pages long. We've seen His hand over and over and over again.
I mean, over and over and over and over, He's provided exactly what we need when we need it.
So really, no fundraising.
Zero. Not one. We spent over $100,000 feeding tornado victims, and God replaced every penny of that. I mean, do I have any idea where that $100,000 came from? No. We don't even recruit volunteers. We don't do a big sign up or anything. We just go and people just come.
We originally thought we were going to pay for the breakfast out of our grocery budget. Lisa was going to give up some money out of her grocery budget, and I was going to give up some money out of my grocery budget. We knew that serving people the way we served our families would be expensive.
In May of 2010, we were donated an entire restaurant's worth of commercial kitchen equipment. We got things from that donation that we didn't even know that we need. For instance, we got fire extinguishers. We got clocks for the wall. We got plates and napkins and forks and glasses and a grill and a 6-burner stove and a convection oven and refrigeration equipment and prep tables and bowls and pans and pots and everything that you would need. There was one morning in January of, I guess, 2010, when I was driving down the interstate, and we'd started the ministry. We'd been in the park, and some people knew about it. You know, we'll put it on Facebook, and we'll tweet, and we'll do some, trying to get it out there. But people just kind of knew, and so I had this lady call me, and she said, I know somebody who wants to give you a little money for this ministry, and he wants you just to come by, and he wants to give it to you in person, and he wants to pray with you. I mean, and she said, don't have a wreck or anything, because I'm thinking we got $150 that we gave, put in the account from the grocery budget. We're good, And I said, okay, and she said, will you come by? I said, sure. So I called Paul and we go by. And this was somebody that we did not know. And he gave us a check for $5,000 and just said, I want you to have this money and I want to pray with you over starting your ministry. And that was kind of why we knew that the kitchen needed to come, because God gave us what we needed to do what we were doing, but He started giving us what we needed to do what He had for us later. It's the perfect example of how He provides what we need before we ask Him. Once the kitchen is finished, we're going to be able to prepare large amounts of food, and we really and truly believe that once it's ready, it's kind of like if you build it, they'll come, kind of idea. We know that God is going to just show us exactly what those opportunities are. We weren't trying to start something new. We weren't trying to create anything. Paul and I were together on a mission trip going to Louisville, Kentucky, and we were actually with the choir. And Paul was in the group that I was in. We ended up at a place called the Lord's Kitchen.
We had walked into the Lord's Kitchen, and what I remember about it is that we were setting up, we were getting our instructions from the people who ran the kitchen to tell us what we were going to be doing, and then we were lining up to practice what we were going to sing. And I was standing next to a group of women, and I looked out the front door from where I was standing, and I was reading their hours on it and seeing when they served. And in my head it was audible, but I heard, Polly, you need to feed people. This is what you need to do. You need to feed people. And I knew that didn't come from me. We were walking out of the Lord's Kitchen to go back to where we were staying, and Lisa walked right up to me and she said, Paula, God told me I need to feed people. And I said, oh, He told me the same thing.
We knew it was something we were supposed to do because we just couldn't shake it.
We had read a book by a man named Mike Yankowski, who had written a book can't remember the name now.
Under the
Under the overpass, thank you. Under the overpass, and he was a college student who lived as a homeless person in 5 cities around the country to see what people's response, specifically Christians' response, were to the homeless. And that was a very eye-opening book. And one of the things that had stood out to both of us was that breakfast is a meal that a lot of people who live on the streets don't get, because they get turned out of shelters, and then a lot of soup kitchens serve lunch or dinner or both, but they don't. A lot of them don't necessarily serve breakfast. Grace's Kitchen, our mission statement is to glorify God by providing fresh and healthy food to people in need. And we knew that God was calling us to serve people in the park and that we would be serving people who were homeless, but that's not all that He called us to do.
Grace's Kitchen is more than just a homeless ministry. We are a feeding ministry, and so that looks different than just going downtown and feeding in the park. That's a huge part of what we do. We want to continue to do that. We hope we get to continue to do that. But we know that there's been ministries in town that have called and said, we serve women who need to get their GEDs, and these women have a hard time getting breakfast and lunch and getting their kids fed and also getting here to take their GED classes. Would you help us feed them? Absolutely. You know, there are people who are doing this in cities all over. There's people who are doing this in Birmingham. You know, there are people who, it was such a, this whole thing is really not about Paul and I. It's just about God opening our eyes to need, and God showing us that we're not supposed to live our lives for ourselves, and that there's a much bigger picture than what either of us had really been paying attention to.
And one of the things that we read under the overpass that really stood out to us was that a lot of people who are homeless may not ever hear anybody call them by their name, or they may not ever have anybody look them in the eye or hug them or shake their hand. And so we've tried to be very intentional about those things, learning people's names. And so that's really, but those relationships matter, and it matters when we call people by name. We're Grace's Kitchen, and this is part of our story.